Hello everyone, I am Michelle Tikilang, and today I will present to you Expert 1, which is Chapter 1, Building a Culture of Inquiry. Think back to your own experiences in school. Do you remember your favorite project? What was your topic? How did you share your information? What made the experience so special? This kind of learning remains a strong and compelling memory for those of us lucky enough to have experienced a self-directed or inquiry-based project. The feelings are the same whether we experience this learning in the early elementary grades, as a high school student, or as a graduate student. Many of us, when asked about the positive memory of school, will remember a project with real-world applications that engage our memory, our emotions, and our thinking. Often it was a research project that we shared with friends and family. Some teachers have not had experience of a research project in their own schooling, but they have taken up the challenge of creating inquiry-based learning experiences for students and are aware of the wonder and excitement that an inquiry project can bring to learning. Now, what is inquiry? According to Galileo Educational Network in 2004, inquiry is a dynamic process of being open to wonder and puzzlements and coming to know and understand the world. It involves a process of exploring the natural or material world, and that leads to asking questions, making discoveries, and testing those discoveries in the search for new understanding. What is inquiry-based learning? Inquiry-based learning is a process where students are involved in their learning, formulate questions, investigate widely, and then build new understandings, meanings, and knowledge. That knowledge is new to the students and may be used to answer a question, to develop a solution, or to support a position or point of view. This is usually presented to others and may result in some sort of action. So basically, it is a student-centered learning approach with the concept of students who are actively involved in the teaching and learning activity under the monitoring and supervision of teachers. What does the research say? According to Cooney, 1995 research suggests that using inquiry-based learning with students can help them become more creative, more positive, and more independent. This is true for all students, including those with special needs who require more individual attentions during the process. According to Gleif 2001, other academic research shows that inquiry-based learning improves student achievement. Some of the research on this effect comes from the studies of effective school library programs that are centers of inquiry-based learning. A school library program that is properly equipped and staffed can make a difference in terms of measurable gains in student achievements. According to Lance 2001, school library factors alone can account for improvements of 2% to 9% in student achievement. These are the guidelines for building a culture of inquiry. First, administrators in the school or district have a clearly articulated vision of inquiry. The vision for inquiry is carried forward despite competing pressures. 2 or more champions promote the vision for inquiry. Resources and space for inquiry are readily accessible. Teachers collaborate and support each other. Teachers, students, and parents trust each other. Small interdisciplinary teams of teachers work together. And lastly, problem-solving and investigative skills are valued throughout the school or school system.
Good day everyone. I am going to discuss the requirements for building a culture of inquiry and metacognition, and the inquiry across the curriculum. So first is the requirements for building a culture of inquiry. So, culture of inquiry begins with a welcoming climate of trust and validation where students understand the value of questions and the adventure of seeking answers. So, here are some important things to know about creating the culture and some ideas that you might consider in creating culture of inquiry. So, first is the culture versus climate. So when we make a change or set an expectation for how a classroom will operate, we begin to affect the climate. It takes time for something to become a part of the curriculum. So the second one is the welcome. So teachers need to make sure that students feel valued in their classrooms. So they need to create an activities for students to share their passions and interests. So the second is the inquiry and metacognition. So metacognition refers to a person's ability to regulate their thinking and learning and consists of the self-assessment skills like planning, monitoring, and evaluating. So these are the important skills can reduce self-assessment errors such as hindsight bias among healthcare providers. So the first one is the planning. So learners plan better and learn when their attention focuses on learning objectives established by the instructor. So lead the learners to analyze the distinction between contrasting information and focus more on these differences rather than similarity between concepts. So, second is the monitoring. So, learners benefit from monitoring their understanding during teaching activities. So, by checking learning behaviors throughout the lecture of teaching activities, learners are reminded of the importance of the learning process. So, the third one is the evaluating. So, by evaluating metacognitive skills, learners become more aware of this process and its impact on learning. So, the next one is the inquiry across the curriculum. So, from the traditional rule of teaching as director, other more effective rules such as the collaborator or facilitator are sought after, which are more relevant to this new millennium era that strives for better curriculum reform. So, inquiry across the curriculum includes: first is the field-tested curriculum materials grounded in the national standards. Second is the practical strategies that provide reliable assessment data about how students perform when engaged in inquiry. Third one is the enlightening first-person's account illustrating inquiry in the classroom. And the last one is an exploration of inquiry from the unique perspective of geography, science, history, language arts, mathematics, and more. So these are all, and thank you so much.
This is Crystal May B. Salarda, and this time we will discuss about Expert 3, a systematic approach to inquiry. According to Heather Banshee and Randy Beal, 2008, there are four levels of inquiry-based learning, namely Level 1, Confirmation Inquiry, Level 2, Structured Inquiry, Level 3, Guided Inquiry, Level 4, Open Inquiry. This time, we will discuss each. Let's begin with Level 1, the Confirmation Inquiry level. This is the most familiar and the easiest to do. At this level, the teacher will develop both questions and procedures to guide the students through an activity where the results are known in advance. It is considered as the lowest level of inquiry, and it is primarily used to reinforce ideas and to introduce inquiry skills. Here's the example of confirmation inquiry level, wherein the teacher provides instruction or procedures on how to do the particular activity. So let's say here, the teacher instructed her or his students to drop the egg by itself, drop the egg with lots of protection. And then later on, the teacher will ask the students a question about what are their observations. Now let's proceed to level 2, the structured inquiry. This level is somewhat similar to level 1, but this level involves developing students' critical thinking, where questions and outline procedures were generated or provided by the teacher, but the results are unknown. At this level, it simply means that the students are the ones who formulate or generate explanation, answers, and solutions. Here's the example of structured inquiry level, wherein the teacher gave the students a problem, which is to protect the egg, and then give them a set of materials and procedure for designing a specific device. All students build the same model or different variation, and then they will define reporting, handout or questions, drawings, and etc.
This is Paul Christian Deal Images, and this time we will continue to discuss the levels of inquiry-based learning. Now we are in level 3, which is the guided inquiry level. This level allows students to take more ownership for the experiment and findings. The students are responsible for designing the procedure and following it to answer the question that the teacher provided. Because learners now have more freedom in developing the procedure and finding useful content, it is important for teachers to provide guidance and feedback where necessary. Here's the example of guided inquiry level, wherein the teacher gives the students the problem, which is to protect the egg. Instead of giving them all materials, give them a budget and option to buy different quantities. No set of guidelines for building device, perhaps some rules but no procedure. Some define reporting procedure with student input. Next level is the open or true inquiry level. At the highest level of inquiry-based learning, within broad parameters, students establish ownership of the experiment and findings. Students are allowed to choose a topic or idea that is of interest and begin to formulate their own research questions and design a procedure to conduct the study. Once the study is complete, the teacher may have their students prepare a report or presentation detailing the findings and results. Banchi and Bell in 2008 explained that teachers should begin their inquiry instructions at the lower levels and work their way to open inquiry in order to effectively develop students' inquiry skills. Open inquiry activities are only successful if students are motivated by intrinsic interests and if they are equipped with the skill to conduct their own research. Now here's the example of open or true inquiry level, wherein the teacher will not give the students the problem, but allow students to use any materials, any design, procedure, any evaluation, and reporting metrics. Science fair projects are often examples of open inquiry.
Chapter 2, A Model for Inquiry. What is model? Why is a model useful? So a model is a description or physical representation that increases understanding of something that cannot be directly observed. It is a way of connecting our learnings. For example, a model of a solar system. If you are going to study, it is easy to understand. So this is the inquiry model of Dunham in 2001. From reflecting on the process, we have planning, retrieving, processing, creating, sharing, and evaluating. So, we have the inquiry model as a scaffold for instruction, as a guide for learning, or feelings rather. We have the inquiry model as a common language for teachers and students, as a guide for teachers, and the last, we have the inquiry model as a guide for monitoring. So let's discuss this one by one. The inquiry model as a scaffold for instruction. So the inquiry model provides the content and structure for instruction. This is the outlining the skills and strategies that need to be taught explicitly in each phase of the process. So referring to the model frequently and consistently during the planning of inquiry-based learning activities keeps instructional concerns in the forefront as lessons are prepared and as instructional materials are created. The next is the inquiry model as a guide for feelings. The inquiry process, like any demanding learning experience, brings with it various feelings, including enthusiasm, apprehension, frustration, and excitement. So these feelings are experienced in a definite pattern in the various phases of the inquiry process. By referring to the model throughout the inquiry-based learning activity, teachers are able to anticipate and recognize when students are experiencing strong feelings and are able to design support systems and reflective activities that help students move through the process. So, next is the inquiry model as a common language for teachers and students. So, a common language for both teachers and students helps students to internalize the model and to talk about the learning processes involved. So it increases effective communication among all inquirers in a school since it gives teachers and students the words to talk about the parts of the process. So posting a model in classrooms and in the library or any place in the school where inquiry learning takes place. So encourages students to recognize each phase as part of the whole process. Next is the inquiry model as a guide for students. So the inquiry model guides students in using an analytical approach that includes all phases in the inquiry process. Without learning an inquiry process, students often develop a very limited and narrow view of inquiry. They may think that inquiry is finding the answer to other people's questions for the satisfaction of their teacher, rather than understanding inquiry as the process of being puzzled about something, generating their own questions, and using information to satisfy their own interest and to develop their own knowledge. So the last one is the inquiry model as a guide for monitoring. So teachers use the inquiry model to assess how effectively students have engaged in the inquiry process, how deeply they understand it, and how effectively the process has been sequenced across grades. So for example, a school or district matrix that maps the topics of the inquiry-based units and the skills and strategies introduced, developed, and extended across the grades, provides a basis for articulation, coordination, and equity. So such a matrix can also be used to balance large-scale and small-scale inquiry activities. So students can get the experience and practice they need in inquiry-based learning without overloading teachers in a particular grade or subject area. Teachers and students the words to talk about the parts of the process. So posting a model in classrooms and in the library or any place in the school where inquiry learning takes place. So encourages students to recognize each phase as part of the whole process. Next is the inquiry model as a guide for students. So the inquiry model guides students in using an analytical approach that includes all phases in the inquiry process. Without learning an inquiry process, students often develop a very limited and narrow view of inquiry. They may think that inquiry is finding the answer to other people's questions for the satisfaction of their teacher, rather than understanding inquiry as the process of being puzzled about something, generating their own questions, and using information to satisfy their own interest and to develop their own knowledge. So the last one is the inquiry model as a guide for monitoring. So teachers use the inquiry model to assess how effectively students have engaged in the inquiry process, how deeply they understand it, and how effectively the process has been sequenced across grades. So for example, a school or district matrix that maps the topics of the inquiry-based units and the skills and strategies introduced, developed, and extended across the grades, provides a basis for articulation, coordination, and equity. So such a matrix can also be used to balance large-scale and small-scale inquiry activities. So students can get the experience and practice they need in inquiry-based learning without overloading teachers in a particular grade or subject area.
Good day everyone, I am Chingy Zarate and today I'm going to explain the Expert 5. So Miss Kanay already explained what is inquiry model, and at this moment I will explain the phases of the inquiry model, and there are 5 phases of inquiry model, which are the planning, retrieving, processing, creating, sharing, and evaluating. Now let's begin the first phase of the inquiry model, which is planning phase. Inquirers should understand that the underlying purpose of inquiry-based learning projects is to develop their learning-to-learn skills. Inquiry-based learning begins with inquirers' interest in or curiosity about a topic. At this phase of the inquiry process, inquirers often experience a sense of optimism about the task ahead. So once students are interested in a broad topic or theme they need to be involved in, determining what questions will be investigated, how they might find the information they need about a particular topic, how to present information to a particular audience, and suggesting criteria for evaluating the research product and process. And the second phase is retrieving phase. The inquiries next think about the information they have and the information they want. This pre-focus phase is at first enjoyable for students, as they actively search for information related to their topic. But as the amount of resources they find increases, students sometimes tune out and stop searching since they may not know how to handle the irrelevant data or cannot find the data specific to their inquiry. Since many students are set in what they want to find out, they often become frustrated at this point in this process. Since many students are set in what they want to find out, they often become frustrated at this point in the process. Teachers help students pass these feelings of frustration by teaching them that these feelings are ones that all inquirers experience, and by teaching them the skills and strategies for selecting relevant information, for adjusting and modifying inquiries. Teachers often need to help inquirers understand that the information they find, whether in a library book, in a newspaper, or on an internet site, was created by people with particular beliefs and purposes, and that information is not just objective facts. And the third phase is processing. This phase begins when the inquirer has found a focus for the inquiry. A focus is the aspect of the topic area that the inquirer decides to investigate. Coming to a focus can be very difficult for students as it involves more than narrowing the topic. It involves coming to academic questions, a personal perspective, and a compelling thesis statement. Inquirers usually experience a sense of relief and elation when they have established a focus for their inquiry. Even so, the inquirers choose pertinent information from resources is often a difficult task. There may be too little information or too much information, or the information may be too superficial or in-depth for the inquirers. In this phase, teaching students how to compare, contrast, and synthesize data helps them through the disorder that can occur in this phase. Now let's proceed to the fourth phase of the inquiry model, which is creating pace. Organizing the information, putting the information into one's own words, and creating a presentation format are the next tasks in the process. Students feel more confident at this phase and want to. This phase begins when the inquirer has found a focus for the inquiry. A focus is the aspect of the topic area that the inquirer decides to investigate. Coming to a focus can be very difficult for students as it involves more than narrowing the topic. It involves coming to academic questions, a personal perspective, and a compelling thesis statement. Inquirers usually experience a sense of relief and elation when they have established a focus for their inquiry. Even so, The inquiries choose pertinent information from resources is often a difficult task. There may be too little information or too much information, or the information may be too superficial or in-depth for the inquiries. In this phase, teaching students how to compare, contrast, and synthesize data helps them to the disorder that can occur in this phase. Now let's proceed to the fourth phase of the inquiry model, which is creating pace. Organizing the information, putting the information into one's own words, and creating a presentation format are the next tasks in the process. Students feel more confident at this phase and want to include all their new learnings in the product, resulting in too much information. At this phase, teachers build on their students' feelings of confidence and teach the skills and strategies that enable students to narrow down or focus their creation. And the fifth phase of inquiry model is sharing. Sharing phase. If students have been given enough support throughout the inquiry process, they are proud of their product and eager to share it, regardless of the format or audience. They may feel a bit nervous about presenting something in which they take such ownership, and they may feel anxious that others may not understand or appreciate their efforts. Nevertheless, they feel that they have done well on this assignment. At this phase of inquiry model, teacher teach students audience appreciation skills and strategies, and focusing on the positive helps to support students through this phase. And last phase is evaluating phase. Finally, when a research project is complete, inquiries feel relieved and happy. They are excited about their new skills and understandings, and they want to reflect on the evaluation of their product and the inquiry process. In order to make sense of the inquiry process, they need to understand and question the evaluation criteria to identify the steps in the inquiry process and able to share their feelings about the process. In these phases of inquiry model, the evaluating phase will help students to able to articulate the importance of this kind of work for developing their learning to learn skills, and they should be able to see the connection between the inquiry work done in school and their work or activities that are done outside of school. And that's all for the 5 phases of the inquiry model.